The Lucifer Effect speaks at length of colorful trials and circumstances. I'll concentrate rather on the main takeaways then. Moral disengagement breeds evil. Utmost people, utmost of the times, are moral. But imagine morality like a gear shift, and like a gear shift, it can go neutral. When that happens, there's no more morality to stop our conduct, and if our auto persona happens to be standing on a pitch, we can fluidly go upwardly and do effects that we wouldn't else do. How do we liberate morality? Well, for major ways, according to my understanding of the Lucifer Effect. De-individuation, loss of tone in the group's dynamics. Dehumanization, we doen't consider our victims to be humans and like us, so morals doen't apply to them. Obscurity, people commit further crimes when they can stay anonymous. Prolixity of responsibility, the more the people, the lower we feel responsible for helping or for inflicting pain. Plus, the neighborhood effect rundown in the Bronx and clean and neat in Palo Alto, broken window proposition. Time pressure, if we in a hurry, we're less likely to help. Failing to fate porosity of good and evil invites evil. Zimbardo says we all want to construct a simple world where good and evil are contrary. But they're not. Our Western societies also tend to induce us into miscalculations as they glorify the individual and the individual choices, dispositional approach. But the individual acts in a bigger social setting and takes on different places within his life. Still, they can overpower else moral and ethical people if the social setting and the places he takes on tilts a certain way. This is important because when we fail to understand how we can all produce wrong, also we invite evil. To help wrong, we need to learn evil. How evil is created. Zimbardo lists a many ways that have been shown to overpower particular ethics to induce evil acts, grounded on the Milgram trial. Prearrange a form of contractual obligation. Give them meaningful places to play where they can spark preliminarily learned responses. Use rules and remind them that rules are rules and must be followed. Change the semantics from hurting someone to helping the researcher/wisdom/country. Produce prolixity of responsibility, they wouldn't have to take final responsibility. Start small and make up to bigger acts of evil. Increase the way in small quantities so that each step seems nearly like the last. Start rational and just in when you act evil people wouldn't fate the difference. Make the costs of quitting high. Offer in testament of a taradiddle to justify the evil acts. Hence, the ways to stop crime of obedience is to assert particular authority and take responsibility for one's conduct. The Stanford Experiment. Zimbardo spends a lot of time agitating his own notorious Stanford trial. Scholars who started as normal and mentally healthy mortal beings soon began to change as they started embodying their characters of guards or convicts. The captures came unresistant and amenable. They learned helplessness. The guards on the contrary started acting mean and evil. As effects entwined out of control, several captures had to be released beforehand and the whole trial had to be stopped because it was taking on a veritably bad twist. One internee had an emotional breakdown. The internee latterly reported saying he was faking it to be released. But Zimbardo says he just made that up because he felt shamed of breaking down. Abu Ghraib was predictable. Zimbardo draws a parallel between his Stanford trial and the dishonors of the Abu Ghraib captivity where U.S. service labor force abused and recorded the abuse of original civilians. The author says that it wasn't a case of bad apples. They might have been good people on different occasions. Indeed, analogous abuse happened in the UK military as well, and it included a former war idol. He says the responsibility should be looked in the system that made it possible.
I couldn't agree more that it's the system that we should look into indeed further than the individuality's faults. Still, I did en tête-à-tête find the systemic analysis to be too informational for me then. Commercial evil. Zimbardo makes one further point which I love. He says that organized systems can occasionally produce wrong as a derivative of legal or functional fabrics which don't take into account an ethical frame. A system can produce wrong as a derivative pursuing its pretensions of gains, testament or end results. The author also talks about intervene violence, similar as situations where authority can induce pain without physical assault. Similar as by blasting, giving bad reviews, yelling at an hand, undermining it. Also read Commercial Manipulation. The Myth of Emotional Intelligence. Ethical Defiance for a Better World. This is by far my favorite chapter and commodity I explosively believe in. We should each wonder if the authority that's giving us orders only has the title of authority or also the moral compass to be in charge. Always take responsibility for your conduct. And always look critically at authority. In life, always take responsibility. It also helps the world being a better place. Trope of heroism. The author eventually says that as important as there's the possibility of wrong and we can witness wrong in diurnal circumstances, heroism is the same. There's an idol in each one of us. Turns out, Bowie was right. We can be icons. Just for one day. Icons are everyday people like you and I. What's the Lucifer Effect? The Lucifer Effect in psychology alludes to the fact that all mortal beings can commit atrocity under certain conditions. As a website on psychology, games people play, and the darker side of socialization and mortal nature, good and evil is a content I explored a lot. Also take a look at. To be good, you need to be bad. Good and evil are icons of branch on the branch of a social personality. 12 Rules for Life. The Idol's Aphorism. I did what everyone could and what everyone ought to do. Great stuff. Review of Stanford Experiment and Lucifer Effect. The Stanford trial has been vociferously blamed. The name itself is a misnomer, as the lack of scientific rigor doesn't make it in trial, but as the author himself admitted, further of a demonstration. The results of the trial haven't been replicated in analogous consecutive trials, and I invite you to read this composition, which is the dialogue between Brian Resnick and Zimbardo. It's an incredibly intriguing composition. Zimbardo says at one point, "The single conclusion is a broad-line mortal jest, for numerous people, is much further under the influence of social situational variables than we had ever allowed of ahead. I'll stand by that conclusion for the rest of my life, no matter what anyone says." Would he stand by that conclusion for the rest of his life if he were presented with differing substantiation? I do'n't suppose a scientist should ever say he'll stand by it for the rest of his life. I also set up sad for wisdom in general that Zimbardo didn't want to hear about a co-worker of his with a different opinion. Zimbardo answers to the question of whether he thinks the critics might not be in good faith. I am not saying good faith. That's what their claim to fame is, the significance of social identity. As I said in another composition, scientists should look for the verity. When a scientist stops searching for the verity, he's not a scientist presently. Still, Zimbardo also makes good points in defense of his trial. This is what Zimbardo says, describing the guards' brutality. Were these acts of brutality, and their striking parallels with real-world captivity atrocities, nothing further than a function of social demand characteristics in a fraudulent sham study, as Blum and other critics have argued, or do they tell us commodity important about mortal nature? My opinion is that the Stanford trial has been bloated. But Zimbardo is right, the circumstances around us are veritably important in determining how we will and whether we will act like good people, or like not so good people. Also read The Replication Extremity. Psychology Myths. The Genovese Blunder? The Lucifer Effect also talks about the notorious Genovese pecking where 38 substantiations didn't lift a cutlet or a phone to help a woman who was being assaulted constantly and at different times in the road. Well, turns out the story was largely made up. The New York Times, which ran the original story, also admitted to miscalculations and inconsistencies in the original composition.